Hello.
We're here.
Welcome to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness, a podcast where we talk about the Constitution, history, politics, culture, whatever else I want to talk about. And you can find this podcast on AnnetteTalks.com, iTunes, Spotify, hopefully iHeartRadio. They take like 3 months. YouTube, you can go and see this video on YouTube. And pretty much, oh yeah, also I'm on Facebook, Facebook.com/Annette Talks. Anyway, all right, so today is going to be one of those days we actually talk about the Constitution. I was accused the other day of not always talking about the Constitution or history. I said, well, you've never listened to my podcast.
Right, because you talk about whatever you want to talk about. We did an episode on a movie.
Yes, we did, and it was fun.
The Richard Jewell movie.
And I'll probably do it again.
Yeah, without a doubt.
So, and as you can see and hear, I have a guest today. This is Mr. D.K. Williams, who has been on here a few other times.
Always glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. And tell us what you've got your own podcast going, right?
Yeah, I've got a weekly podcast. It's called The Law with D.K. Williams, and I focus on either historically important Supreme Court cases or cases that are in the news, like currently. They're not always Supreme Court cases because sometimes a lower court might have a ruling that has got a serious implication that's pertinent for now. So, but it's always a case or something to do with the law. And the one that came out, is coming out today actually, here on Friday.
And I'm posting this Monday, so this will be on Friday.
So mine should be out by now. The episode 75, which is the Diamond Anniversary, which I looked up, I knew it was something.
Oh.
The Diamond Diamond Anniversary episode.
Sweet.
Although it's only weeks, not years. Is Ex parte Milligan, which is relevant to what we're going to talk about today. And that is a Civil War era case. A guy was arrested and tried in a military tribunal. He was a Northerner, but he was arrested for basically aiding and abetting and conspiring against the North, aiding and abetting the South. And he was sentenced to die in a military tribunal.
Wow.
Case went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they said that the way that went down was unconstitutional. It deals with martial law, deals with the suspension of habeas corpus, which can be done during times of war and other exigencies
I found that
the Supreme Court.
in cases of a rebellion or invasion, public safety may require it.
Right, and there was a rebellion at that time. But so it has a lot of great language about the limits on government, and the government was making the argument that Mr. Milligan needed to be put to death because there's a lot of serious stuff going on, and it was necessary to protect the state. And the Supreme Court said, well, there's limits. You can't just say it's necessary, and then because that means you can do whatever you want to do. Whatever you deem, whoever's in control deems necessary, that's no limit at all.
Right.
So check it out. It's The Law with D.K. Williams. It's on all the reputable and irreputable podcast providing apps. SpeakeasyIdeas.com/The Law is where you'll find my podcast all lined up. And on Twitter, it's The Law it's Twitter at The Law DKW, Facebook.com/The Law with D.K. Williams. So check it out. I think you'll like it.
All right.
That's what I got going
Excellent.
on.
Yeah, and I like your podcast episodes. They're fun. I would say he makes a lot of fun.
Thank you.
He takes stuff that's kind of dry, especially when you've gone to law school and you study these cases. They can be really dry. Judges are not the best writers. So you manage to take it and make it into something that we can relate to and understand and actually enjoy listening to.
Thank you.
All right. So today we are going to be talking about what's going on in the country right now, which is absolutely crazy. If you're listening to this 20 years in the future, ask your parents, your grandparents about it. But we have obviously the coronavirus going on right now. And
stay-at-home orders.
Right, yeah, stay-at-home orders that are issued by the governor, and we've had some health departments come in and try. That's
some
another
cities, counties.
It's interesting to watch all these different agencies trying to pass orders that they really don't have the power to do. But
correct.
Before I get there, because it just feels like the state of being right now is one of sort of fear and panic. We see people running out to the store and like wiping out all the supplies. Like I went to Target today, there was probably 2/3 full of stuff, and I'm used to being able to just walk in and buy whatever I want. But no, there were a lot of things I couldn't buy because people have been panic buying. And people are doing crazy things like calling 911 to tell the police that their neighbor is standing outside. Like they're really
not
taking
social distancing appropriately.
Yes, and everyone's just like all of a sudden social distance police. And so when I see these kind of things going on, and also just there's a general level of anxiety that you can feel when you're on social media.
And schools are out, and most businesses are closed.
Yes, everything's just topsy-turvy, upside down, and so a lot of people have been acting out of fear and panic, and that's not the way that we do things. That's not the way we should be doing things, especially not in this country. And so when we let fear guide us, we tend to sort of forget all the other things that are really important. Like number one being that we have a constitution in this country. And so what I would like to convey is that we should always, always, always question when the government all of a sudden does something out of the ordinary, especially when it starts to take away powers that we ordinarily have.
Because, as you pointed out, this still applies even when people are sick.
Yes.
And
we are going to get into that.
There's no excuse.
Yes.
Sickness is not an excuse to ignore this.
Yeah, this does not go away. All of a sudden, there's no clause in the Constitution that says, except if there's a really bad virus out there, and then just ignore this. It doesn't say that. But so I want you to remember to always question. I've been getting some negative feedback on Facebook, shall we say, when I start bringing this up, like, don't you know there's a virus? Don't you know people are dying?
We need this protection.
Yes, we do.
That's what they say.
I'm going to keep questioning. I'm going to keep posting.
Always.
I'm going to keep the conversation going, because as soon as you stop questioning and you start going along like sheeple, then guess what? The next emergency is maybe not quite as much of an emergency, and maybe you don't really bother to question too much of when your powers are being or your rights are being taken away. And when that continues to happen, all of a sudden it doesn't matter whether this only works. I'm holding up the Constitution for you that are just
Right.
listening. This only works when we honor it and we require that it be upheld by our so-called leaders.
Even when it's hard to do. That's the time when you have to do it.
Especially when it's hard to do.
Right.
And so the other thing I wanted to say is, all of you moms that are homeschooling all of a sudden, like I'm, something that I've always avoided, never wanted to do it for a good reason, because I hate it. I have my kids, at home, they're with me all day for school, and then guess what? They're still there, and they're still here with me. Like I can't get away from them. But one good thing that's come out of it is that every day we have a little Constitution discussion, and so the girls now have a basic understanding of the 3 articles, and we've gone through at least the first few amendments, and we're going to keep going. But take this time to talk to your family, talk to your neighbors, of course at a social distance, on social media about what's going on and why it's not okay. At least question. Even if people aren't agreeing with you, keep questioning and teach your kids. I used all this stuff as an example to my girls as to what our freedoms are and why they should not be taken away. And we talked about freedom of assembly and why the Second Amendment's there to protect the First Amendment. But so anyway, challenge things. Don't ever just blindly go along, because the government will always take every opportunity they can to take more power. And this is just a perfect emergency for them. And then the last thing I wanted to say before we get into deciding or talking about whether these stay-at-home orders are constitutional is please maintain your sense of humor, people. I've had people look at me weird in the grocery store when I joke around with them, and I've had people on Facebook sort of be not kind to me when I've been funny. And it's like, if ever there's a time that you need your sense of humor, it's right now.
It's like, lighten up, people.
We're going to get through this.
Yeah.
But we're going to get through this by not allowing our freedoms to be taken away, and by unifying at a distance, and by keeping our sense of humor. So that's what I want to say about that. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about these stay-at-home orders. We now have one in our state. Just, I think, went into effect yesterday. Because we had, like here in Douglas County where I live, the Tri-County Health Department decided that it was going to issue its own stay-at-home order that was going to go till the 17th. And then I read an article that said the county commissioners weren't on, not all of them were on board with this. So it's like, who can make these orders, who
Right.
can't?
Well, no one can.
Yeah. And,
Basically, there's no government, no level of government can order you to stay in your house. Period. Not in this country.
right, so let's just lay a little groundwork for that. We know that the states have like general police power, right? So when there is a time of emergency, they can make laws to apply to us. However, there's a limit to those.
Thank
right?
goodness. Yeah, they're not. There's not a
Yeah.
monarchy.
But it's purposely put down at the state level so that every state can handle it differently. And you see that right now. What is it, a third of the states that are on stay-at-home orders, something like that? But that means there are several states that are not on stay-at-home orders. So in that way, what we're seeing right now is a good thing. If Trump had decided he was going to try and do a stay-at-home order, that would be a huge, huge violation, or huge, as Trump would say, violation of the Constitution. So in one sense, it's good that we have different states doing different things, because that was set up that way purposely, so we would have 50 laboratories that people could experiment in. So if you see one state screwing it up over here, you don't have to
You can learn from it.
do the same thing in your state.
Right.
However, these stay-at-home orders, which basically say, don't go anywhere unless you have to.
And there's a list of exceptions, which
Right.
pretty much cover a whole lot of things. But again, there's no legitimate reason, no legitimate authority for the police to pull you over and ask you where you're going.
Right.
Because the rule says you can go to the store, you can go to the pharmacy, and if you have an essential job, I guess, which doesn't include a whole lot of them, they're all closed. But
Yeah.
and you can exercise, so you can go out and walk. They say.
I know.
But there's no legitimate way. There is no justification, and this isn't happening. I'm just making that the point. It's kind of the implication is that you're going to be asked where you're going. Do you have permission to be out?
Yeah.
And thankfully, they're not doing that because they know they don't have the authority to do it. And they say that if you are pulled over for something else like speeding or taillights out, then the Denver Police Department, their spokesperson said that then the police might ask you where you're going, and the police department spokesperson said, and you should just tell them. No, you shouldn't. No, you should not. Absolutely, you should
Yeah.
not.
Well, what should you tell them if you get pulled over for that?
Your or not Your Honor, officer. I very much appreciate the work that you do. I know it's a hard job, but as a patriotic American, I love the Constitution, and I always exercise the rights guaranteed to me by it. And I simply will always, as a matter of principle, because I love this country, I will not answer questions. I'm going to exercise my right to remain silent, and I'm not going to consent to any searches. So, am I free to go, or am I being detained?
Yeah.
That's what you say.
And say it with a smile on your
Right,
face.
exactly.
Right?
Be polite. Yeah, and this is why this is important, because we talked about how it's easy to enforce the Constitution when it's not being tested.
Yes.
Right? But now it's being tested, and now's when you have to flex your rights. You have to assert them, because if you don't, they will be trampled.
Right.
So
Okay, so let's get
exercise
into
them.
what's the problem of these stay-at-home orders. Because they violate our right to travel.
Yeah, due process,
Which is a fundamental right.
Right. Yeah.
It violates our right to assemble, which is a First
Yes.
Amendment right. Those are just two big ones, but the Supreme Court case, I don't even know which one established this test, but if you're going to substantially burden a fundamental right, which is what we just mentioned, right to travel, right to assemble, then the government must prove that the regulation is narrowly tailored to advance a compelling governmental purpose. So this is one of those tests that we learn in law school, that we do all these little analyses to figure out whether, this law does
Which makes it much
violate
more
this.
complicated than it should be, but that is what they teach
But
us.
it is what it is.
That is what they teach us.
It's
yes.
where it is. And
Yes.
so if you were going to take a case to, let's say you had a client that was arrested for driving out of his neighborhood to
Right.
do something non-essential. Let's just say hypothetically it was something totally crazy, like he was going to go see his girlfriend or something
Right.
like that, and he didn't have an essential purpose. Right? Well, I was joking about this on Facebook
Well, you can
yesterday.
see how ridiculous it
Because
is.
who's not doing
Yeah.
that? Give me a
Just-
break.
Yeah, just posing the question shows you how ridiculous it is.
So anyway, So what you would want to analyze this is, first of all, you would have to look at whether or not there's a compelling governmental purpose.
Well, they would say, yeah, absolutely. We're all going to die if we don't stay in our house.
Right.
That's the argument. A lot of people will die. And what's more compelling than that?
Yeah.
That's the argument, right?
Except that the problem is that they said, one of the articles I read talked about how Italy was already doing all those quarantining and look at their...
Yeah, they've got apparently for some demographic reason, they had a much higher percentage of older people than most of Europe and the Western culture.
Right.
But Sweden hasn't done any of this, hasn't done any stay-at-home orders. They haven't closed businesses, and they are doing okay.
Yeah,
so again, these cultures are very different.
There's something else going on.
Yeah, and a friend of mine who grew up in Sweden said, "Well, yeah, because we've been social distancing forever. It's just we don't get that close to each other anyway."
Oh,
yeah, she's kind of joking, but the cultures are different.
It makes sense. When I was in Korea for a while, I lived down there. There was no social distance. Like you would be.
There's no room, right?
No,
yeah, there's no room.
I was always shocked. So I would get on the subway or the bus, and it was like this.
Yeah, right.
And I was like. And they look at me like, "What's wrong with you?
Yeah,
Aren't you used to just being body slammed up against strangers?"
Sardines.
Yeah, and so some cultures do have more social distance than others. But even if you said, well, so let's say it's a compelling governmental purpose. Okay, we're trying to keep people alive. But then you have to look at whether or not this is a narrowly tailored regulation. Right. So this is one of the big problems that we have here is that these are so not narrowly tailored.
Yeah, they apply to everyone. If it applies to everyone in every circumstance, it's not narrowly tailored.
And it's way overboard.
Right, exactly.
Why couldn't we just social distance? Why can't I go to a restaurant and say, because they did this before they went to stay at home. They were putting restaurants at 50% capacity, movie theaters at 50% capacity. I thought that's not bad. Right. You can still go to a theater and maybe there's 2 seats empty.
And most matinees in the summertime only have 8 people in a 75-person theater anyway.
Right.
But now they can't even do that. They've closed them all down.
Yeah, everything's closed down.
So that's why it's not narrowly tailored.
Yeah, and the libraries, they could have done that with everything.
Right.
And you could have just said, go wherever you want, just maintain social distance.
Right.
And that would have been a lot more narrowly tailored.
Right.
And
I still think there's problems with that, but it's a lot better than we've got right now. Yeah.
If you're going to go with, a Supreme Court...
their rubric, their test.
Yeah, their test. I know you don't like those balancing tests. I know they suck.
No.
But if you were going to take this into
but that's what they do. Yeah,
a court of law, that's what they would say.
Yeah.
And so then, this one article talked about the Denver's lockdown. And the other thing is, even if you're not talking constitutionality, these were thrown together so quickly, they're just ridiculous. Like, they're incoherent,
Yeah.
Like, all individuals anywhere in the city and county of Denver are ordered to stay at their place. It says, should be places, right? First of all, grammar, but places of residence. But that makes sense if you're a Denver resident, but how can non-residents who happen to be in Denver be ordered to stay in their place of residence if they have no residences in Denver?
Yeah.
When this first started, and you live in Denver County.
I'm in Denver proper, yeah.
I'm in Douglas County. So when your county was on lockdown...
Yeah, yours wasn't.
I maybe could have come to your house, but...
Then you're stuck there. You can't leave.
I'm stuck, exactly. According to this, I can't go anywhere.
Right. And these are so clearly unenforceable. As I describe them, they're strong suggestions with the bluff of criminal penalties behind it.
So people need to remember that too.
Right.
Again, if you're pulled over, say what DK said.
Yeah, be polite and just use your rights. It's un-American to waive your rights. Don't be un-American. Right.
And if you are arrested for something like this and you're actually fined, you need to challenge this.
Yeah,
you need to challenge it on a constitutional basis because it's clearly unconstitutional. So he said there were so many things in this Denver one, and this is going to be the same with the Colorado because now things weren't confusing enough. First, Denver had a lockdown. Then Tri-County Health Commission had a lockdown for several counties, and it was different from Denver.
Yeah, different rules.
And then,
rules.
Because all these different municipalities and counties were doing different things, our governor decided to just do a statewide lockdown, which, it's better for uniformity, but not good in that now the whole state is locked down. And then he set it the end date as April 11th, where it was the 17th. And so these dates seem awfully arbitrary
Yeah,
to
well,
me
they-
as
they
well.
are,
So
yeah.
how can you even know the law if it's constantly changing? If I didn't check email or the news yesterday, I don't even know. It could be April 16th and I think I'm still in a lockdown, but I'm not. So there's all sorts of ridiculousness about this.
And about another anecdote or what happened when Denver did their rule, that came out with a rule, and at first it included that liquor stores and weed stores had to close. And this was announced at like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and by like 2:15, I'm not kidding you. There's pictures on the internet. Liquor stores had lines like around the block,
Right.
Because they thought that they weren't going to be able to go to a liquor store anymore.
Yeah.
And the mayor and the people at city council went, you know what? Maybe we should reconsider that. And 2.5 hours, almost 3 hours after the initial order, where they said we're going to close all the liquor stores, they said never mind. They did the Emily Latella, never mind, and they rescinded that part of it. And so it's a good example of unintended consequences and how central planning is impossible to do. So the idea was we don't want people congregating, so we're going to close the liquor stores, which made people immediately congregate.
Yes.
People.
Yeah, lines around.
The ability to
non-social distance lines.
Exactly.
Right.
The ability to think things through, even on a secondary level, a secondary consequence, much less beyond that. And there are multiple levels of consequences to any type of government policy like
Yes.
that. And the inability, the incompetence of anyone to try to take that into account when they make these rules is, one, impossible, even if you're going to try to do it.
Yep.
But it's clearly here they didn't even think about it. Because that's an obvious result of what's going
Well,
to
yeah,
happen.
and here's a big question, and I've seen this question many, many times now on social media, which was not, of course, put into the exceptions, because some bureaucrats and some politicians got together and said, well, this is what I think, right? Well, these are the exceptions that I say. Well, apparently none of them were divorced and doing kid exchanges, because that's
that
the big
wasn't
question.
included, right.
I live in Douglas County. My ex lives in Arapahoe County. We meet up in Denver County halfway. So technically,
there was no specific allowance for that.
Yeah, technically, a few days ago, I wasn't supposed to be going to meet him in Denver County. Now, I guess technically, I'm not supposed to do it at all because it's not listed as an exception. So what are we supposed to do? Just shelter in place? Oh, you get the kids from now on?
Yeah.
Some of us might hope that, but that's not.
Or you might hope that, no, you keep them.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
You keep them for the next 10
you keep
days.
them over there. Hey, sorry. I'm
not going to break the rule.
Right. See what I mean by keeping a sense of humor.
Exactly, you got to do that.
But, so, and I mean.
Oh, by the way, I broke the rules to come over. I broke the law to come here.
I wasn't going to say that.
Absolutely. I am a proud scofflaw of stupid laws.
So can I cuff you later?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, anyway, well, that takes me off in another direction altogether. But, so, and some of the points that they make in these articles, and it just clearly illustrates again what DK said is why you can't central plan and do these kinds of things, is like these politicians have no idea of what the real world is, because it says, we think these jobs over here are essential, but there are several jobs that are essential to that essential job.
Right.
And so you stop this job,
Yeah.
that essential job, which is allowed, can't go forward because you've cut off this other. So you cannot create a law in like 2 days and then expect, it's all going to be good. And this doesn't even begin to address the whole fact that the economy is going to tank, and that you have,
Right.
and how many deaths will occur because we have a worldwide depression.
And if it goes on too long, there's going to be people that can't feed their kids. And that's already an issue of paying bills.
Yep.
And it's like the government says, like in Denver, there's been a constant issue over the years of there's too many homeless people, there's too many poor kids. So then the Denver government also says, well, if you have trouble paying your rent and feeding your kids, you can't work and earn any money now. So those are contradictory goals.
Yeah.
That they have issued both rules. Those are both policies they want to fix, but they're at odds with one another.
Right.
And the day after Denver came out with their non-essential worker rule that you're not supposed to go out if it's not essential, I saw pictures of a friend who took pictures of Denver city workers doing landscaping in medians. Oh. So
That's essential.
I mean.
Yeah.
So I firmly believe we should take it just as seriously as the city does,
Yeah.
which is not seriously
It's
at
not
all.
seriously at all.
Right.
So obviously we're responsible citizens, and when I go out, I social distance.
Don't be stupid.
And
Nobody's
for
saying that.
no other reason that I don't want anyone else to feel like they are imperiled by me, and I don't want to imperil
Yeah,
anyone.
be reasonable. There's nothing
So
wrong with
I'm,
that.
wash my hands, I Clorox the heck out of my house.
Yeah, we're not saying thumb your nose because the government told you to do something.
No, we're saying the government shouldn't be telling us to do
Right.
something. And a lot of the stuff that I'm reading says that social distancing would be perfectly sufficient to handle this crisis. And so the problem is it's overbroad in some areas and
Yeah.
underbroad in other areas. There are a lot of problems with this. But the main problems are that they take fundamental rights away.
Yep.
And they're not narrowly tailored to advance a compelling government.
Right,
They're not narrowly tailored.
They're
And-
throwing a blanket over everything
Yeah.
to try to solve a cold toe, right?
Yep.
That was
So
horrible
don't give up.
metaphor, but anyway.
Don't automatically assume that and don't automatically assume that we need to go to these lengths. I've seen so much conflicting information out there about, first of all, how many deaths there are actually happening, how many are going to happen. We don't know. So you can't just say, we're just going to throw a blanket over everything just in case.
Because that's got its own negative consequences.
Yes.
Again, it's hard for anyone to contemplate all the possible consequences of an action. That when you're going to use force, you're forcibly shutting down whatever it is, X, Y, and Z. That has an effect, and all of that is going to be a negative effect. And if you don't look into that, that's being callous.
Yes.
That's being cold.
Yeah.
Because I see a lot of this sanctimony from people going, oh, the economy isn't as important as people saving lives, people dying. Well, the economy keeps people alive.
Yeah.
So to ignore that is callous.
Well,
That is cold.
And a lot of people would be willing to risk their health to continue to make a
Yeah.
living, and they don't feel like they have any other option.
And if you've got an old sick person living with you, you take that into account into how you act. But if you don't have to take that into account.
Yeah.
But the rule applies to both people.
Yeah,
And that's the
I
problem.
still have not seen a good explanation as to why they didn't just quarantine elderly and at-risk people and the people that live with them.
Right.
To me, that would have been narrowly tailored
Yeah.
because you're just taking the people that are at risk to sharing, or even people who have tested positive. But then there better be some due process. We've already read a case
Right.
yesterday about a guy in Kentucky that somehow was told to the governor that he had tested positive for
Somehow, they got that information, which is against health privacy
HIPAA,
laws.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And he was being held in his house to quarantine, and the article says his wife says he was never even tested, and yet there he is in his house with 6 other people.
So he's
trapped.
basically in custody.
Yes.
The police are not letting him leave his property.
Yeah, he's imprisoned in his own house.
Right. And that's a clear violation
And there's other
of due
6
process.
people.
Right.
And there was never even any proof that he was tested
Yeah,
positive.
right.
But even if he was tested positive, there needs to be some kind of due process.
And again, recommendations and knowledge is what will help combat this problem.
Yes.
To tell people, hey, if you live with an old person with a respiratory problem, these are the risks that you face. You might not have any symptoms, but you can get it and give it to them. So
Right.
here's what can happen. So don't ignore that. Be
Yeah.
aware of it. Make your own decisions based on the knowledge, not, okay, everybody in the city can't move. Let people make their own choices.
Right.
Freedom is dangerous.
Yes, it is.
But that's
It just
the
is.
entire point of
We've
this
been
country.
risking our lives,
Yeah.
and people have given up their lives to give us this Constitution. I just can't imagine the people from the Revolutionary War period saying,
Oh man.
I'm sorry, the freedoms that we fought and died for, you're now giving up because there's a virus going around?
Right. Let me hit with a couple of great quotes that I got out of the Ex parte Milligan case, which is on episode 75 of The Law with
Diamond
K. Williams.
episode.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't know who Jeremiah Black was. I never heard of him until I read this case. He was one of the lawyers for Milligan, and he had been a U.S. Attorney General and Secretary of State under James Buchanan, the president. And Buchanan had nominated him to be a Supreme Court justice like 5 years before he was arguing this case in 1866. But his nomination didn't get out of the Senate. So, sometimes we'll hear there's a lot of drama, like especially with Kavanaugh, right? A lot of drama, drama with Bork, drama with Clarence Thomas, not so much with Gorsuch, but sometimes there's drama on these selections. Well, that's been going on forever because there was drama in 1861 for Jeremiah Black. But so he's representing Milligan, the guy who was illegally arrested, detained, and sentenced to die, although they got him out of that. And one of the many great things he said, his prose is beautiful. He said, "No abuse of power is too flagrant to find its defenders, I love that, and it's absolutely true.
Yeah, it is.
You'll see people on the internet going, "I don't, I don't care what the government tells you, do it." Well, that's what
Or
Mr. Black is
my
talking
favorite,
about.
when someone just announced, like when Governor just announced the stay-at-home order,
Right.
someone on there says, "Well, it's about time." And I'm
Right,
like, oh.
right. And then another one from Mr. Black in defense of Milligan. A tyrannical government calls everybody a traitor who shows the least unwillingness to be a slave. I
Yeah,
love this language.
that makes us traitors.
And then we talked about this necessity stuff. Well, we need to protect ourselves. We need these orders. Black wrote something in 1866, or argued something in 1866, that could have been addressing those people right now in 2020. He said, "Nothing that the worst men ever propounded has produced so much oppression, misgovernment, and suffering as this pretense of state necessity." We have to do it, Dave. We have to.
Yeah.
That's the justification for oppression, suffering, and misgovernment. And-
Including this $2 trillion stimulus, which is now about to pass.
Yeah, yeah. That's a whole nother thing. Yeah.
All right. So, in a perfect world, we would say just educate the heck out of the public and tell them this is what's going on, and so this is what we recommend.
Right.
That would be the perfect world. I would even be okay with a much smaller stay-at-home order that just included older people and people with that are at risk because of their already underlying illnesses, and even some social distancing in restaurants and places like that. I could live with that. This, on the other hand, is completely overboard, and I think we both agree all these stay-at-home orders are unconstitutional.
Yeah, they
There's
are.
no question.
And you've got the copy there of this Rob Natelson argument, or essay article with the Independence Institute here in Colorado. There's also a great article on it by Judge Napolitano, who's, I guess, a Fox News contributor.
Yeah, I shared Napolitano on my Facebook page today.
And they're great articles. They explain why these things are not constitutional.
Yeah.
And if you do get in any type of legal troubles, hey, contact one of us. We'll at least talk to you about it, maybe point you in the right direction.
Yes, feel free to email me at annette@annettetalks.com, or comment on Facebook, or
Yep.
send me an instant message on Facebook. You can go to Facebook/Annette Talks, or you can find me on my personal page where all the action really is. Anyway, Annette Mashler Bybee on Facebook. Feel free to send me a friend request, send me an instant message. And DK here is actually, we're both attorneys, but he's actually still practicing. So if you're in Colorado and you have an issue,
Right. I can at least talk to you about it. And hit me up on Twitter @TheLawDKW, or on Facebook, same thing. It's The Law with DK Williams there. And we'll at least have a conversation. And that would be great.
let's do it. All right, this has been good. So again, remember, don't let fear rule you. Do not let
Beer? Don't let beer?
Fear.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Fear.
Got it. That's entirely different.
Don't let fear or any alcoholic beverages
Right.
rule you. When things start going crazy and the government's starting to take over, immediately start to question. And call your senators, your state senators, call your county commissioners, call your governor's office, whoever it is that's starting to do these things, I contacted my county commissioner. And it turns out that some of them were not on board with that.
Right.
So always question. Even if in the end you decide you're wrong and the thing was okay,
Yeah.
question.
Yes. Don't just blithely accept it.
No.
Push back on every assertion of
Know your
government power.
Constitution. If you don't know it, learn it. Teach it to your kids. And that's it. I think we're good.
All right.
Anything else you want to say about
No,
that?
thank you very much.
All right.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you. I welcome all comments on AnnetteTalks.com, Facebook, YouTube, YouTube/Annette Talks, any place you can find me. Thank you to listening. Thank you for listening to Annette on Life, Liberty, and Happiness.
Beautiful.
I know I am.
Ah.